IVM.
Welcome to Police Chowki, a special limited series on your favorite public policy podcast, All Things Policy. This series will take you behind the khaki uniform, beyond the flashing red beacon, and into the heart of the functioning of the Indian police force. We cast a critical eye on the role and function of the police in the Indian democracy, from the silent persistence of paperwork and meticulous investigation to risky counterterrorism efforts and policing in conflict zones. We explore the need for police reform and accountability in the system. Each episode brings you a comprehensive exploration of a unique facet of policing, illuminated by the insights of a former IPS officer who has lived the life behind the badge. So join us every Monday morning as we take you into the complex world of Police Chowki.
Hello and welcome to Police Chowki. The Indian Penal Code of 1860 has been a cornerstone of the Indian criminal justice system for over a century now, and any effort to replace it is a significant change in the Indian legal landscape. The Government of India is attempting to do precisely this and has introduced 3 new bills in the Parliament to replace the Indian Penal Code, Criminal Procedure Code, and the Evidence Act. Currently, the bills have been referred to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Home Affairs and it has been given 3 months to prepare its report. This indicates that the government wants to bring in these laws during the winter session later this year, before the government term expires somewhere in May 2024. Well, you might be wondering why this change, right? Well, our old laws have deep colonial roots and we're looking to create something that's more us, or something which is decolonized. But it's just not about the new names which have been given to these laws, such as the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita, Bharatiya Sakshya Bill, respectively. It's also about how these laws will change the way we understand crimes, punishment, and justice in our country. So join us today as we unpack what the first of these bills, Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which is going to replace the Indian Penal Code, seeks to achieve. And joining me today on the show is Mr. Javeed Ahmad, former IPS officer and DGP of Uttar Pradesh. Welcome back to Police Chowki, Mr. Ahmad.
Thank you, Shri. It's good to be back after a short break. Yes, and today's topic should be of interest to a lot of us, especially those who are bothered about victim rights and how police powers need to be more in consonance with the demands of a democratic
Right.
republic.
So let's start off with the whole, debate or controversy that has broken out over naming of these law, right? Let's get that out of the way first. The names which have been given to these new bills are in Hindi. For example, the IPC, like I earlier mentioned, it's called Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, and the act uses this word, the Sanhita, to refer to the act in the text itself. And a lot of discussion has gone into how, in the recent times, the government has sort of tried to name a lot of laws in Hindi. For example, the National Research Foundation bill is called the Anusandhan NRF bill. Earlier, we had a direct tax Vaad Se Vishwas bill, another Jan Vishwas bill, and so on. So it seems like there's a concerted effort in naming these laws in a particular manner. So as we transition into these new frameworks, I want to know from you, what is the significance of this change in names of laws? Is this some sort of deeper symbolism? Is this going to have any impact or any relevance at all?
You see, naming these new bills with Hindi, connotations and Hindi words has a political messaging that is obvious, and the ruckus and the controversy that has been created because of this is very much in the political domain, and there's little that we would like to add or I would like to add to that, except to say that what happens is that when the debate shifts into whether the new bill should be a sanhita or a code, the more important aspect of what has been incorporated or deleted from that set of laws, or the procedural law or the substantive law, that seems to lose focus, and we are kind of embroiled in this controversy which is not central to the law that is being brought in. With that caveat, let me say that construction of the new sanhita attempt, or there's a declared intention to go out, or to leave behind the colonial past. But my understanding is that while some attempts have definitely been made to make the code or the Sanhita more in tune with modern times, at the philosophical level, there seems to be some confusion in the minds of the drafters about whether they want to make it a Sanhita or a code which is fit for a democratic republic, or they want to have a democratic republic where the citizens are the most empowered set of people, as against empowering the state with more powers to control the behavior and activities of the citizens. So that philosophical clarity, I'm sorry to say, is not very evident, and that is a missed opportunity as far as I'm concerned.
Right, and I wanted to stress a little bit on this aspect of decolonization, which has come up with the introduction of these new bills. I think the statement of the Home Minister and the Parliament also referred to this aspect as to how the Indian Penal Code was essentially enacted, and this is true to a large extent, was essentially enacted in 1860 by the Britishers in a way to maintain law and order, to punish crimes in the country in exercise of their powers of rule, the colonial rule, right? And even the provisions of IPC have been written in a way where it is intricately connected to controlling and oppressing the people. And India, of course, after post independence, there was no attempts to reform criminal law, the criminal justice system. So a lot of these elements continue to have an effect as we progressed into a democratic republics. But the question is, does this bill even attempt to genuinely decolonize our criminal justice system? Because that's what is needed, right? Because it's not just the laws, even our bureaucratic structures, our police, our prisons are deeply colonial in their origin and practice. So of course, decolonizing the Indian state is a larger challenge, and this bill is supposed to play some part in doing that. So do you think this has been achieved, or whatever the talk has been, just, it's all in the air and nothing significant has shifted?
So let us take a few examples and see where the citizen has been made the centerpiece of the law, and where citizens' rights have been curtailed or not expanded in the new formulations that are now before the select committee of the parliament. To look at the positives first, there are definitely certain positives. The law now does not talk about the word lunatic, which is an insensitive word and a politically incorrect word to use. It now talks about persons with mental illness. So it may be symbolic, but it is definitely a good signal being given out by the state that they are not looking at some of their citizens in derogatory terms and calling them lunatics, or rather they are recognizing that it's a form of mental illness that has to be seen with compassion. Similarly, for a simple thing like the service of a summon, you will be surprised that in the earlier formulation or the existing formulation, a summon is to be served only on a male member of the household.
Right.
In today's day and time, that obviously is not an acceptable thing. And now that the word male in the law has been replaced by an adult, which means that even a lady or a female who's present at home and a member of the family can receive a summon on behalf of someone who's part of the family but not present to actually receive it in person. Once again, the acknowledgement of the need for a witness protection program. It is
Right.
something that has been incorporated in the main major law of the country for the first time. But having done that, the drafters of the law have given the responsibility of framing the rules for witness protection with the states, with no responsibility of the center. And the center has not even given any kind of guideline about how it is to be done, at least in the union territories or such jurisdictions, which to my mind is a sort of wasted opportunity, an opportunity that has gone a begging. The center could have incorporated the broad guidelines of a witness protection program as has been delineated by the Honorable Supreme Court into the law. There are some other important additions in terms of the rights of the victims. You are aware that in the present dispensation, the victim is actually a bystander to what is happening. He or she may get a case registered that my house was burgled, so the Union of India or the state of Karnataka or the state of UP will fight the case against unknown person who has allegedly, stolen the bike or burgled the house, and the victim has no real play in what is happening. Now the provisions of the criminal code have been amended, and a number of rights have been given to the victim, who is now given the opportunity to get to know what is happening, the progress in the matter, and stuff like that, which is a very good thing. Having said that, I mean, these obviously are positive things that we were talking about. On the side where the opportunity has been lost, I feel that the increase in the powers and the discretion of the police for keeping people in under remand has been substantially increased, up to 60 days in some cases. And given the fact that in the last 75 years, the lived experience of almost all citizens of this country has been that the police has been misusing their powers, to arm the same police with further powers does not make sense. I recognize that there are certain categories of cases where the accused or the suspect is a hardened criminal. He could be a terrorist. He could be someone who's involved in seditious activities or activities that are prejudicial to the interest of the nation. In such matters, such provisions are used, but they are used through the special acts, which are slightly more stringent as far as other conditions are concerned. They are not used as part of the main criminal code, or the Nyaya Sanhita, as it is now called. These are opportunities that have been missed, where the citizens' rights have been encroached or are attempted to be encroached, and the power of the police. Even though I'm a former police officer, I realize that more control and more accountability is required as far as the police is concerned, rather than giving them more powers across the board.
Right. And just to sum up what you said, right, to take a step back and look at what is colonization or colonial rule, it was the idea that people are the subjects of the king or the queen. And when we gained independence and when we became a democratic republic, the notion shifted and the relationship between the state and individual changed to one of being, citizens and not subjects of the state. And this would mean that any attempt of decolonization would ensure that the powers of the state are sort of curtailed and the individual rights and liberties are expanded. And that is the basic thesis with which we should work at in any attempt at decolonization. And the examples that you mentioned seem to suggest that those powers of the state have been perpetuated, while not much has been done to expand the rights of the individual as far as these new changes are concerned. Having said that, I want to discuss some of the specific provisions such as sedition and so on that this Nyaya Sanhita wants to bring in, or the replacement of sedition rather. But before that, just a simple question, so whenever any legal system wants to make changes to law, it prefers the route of amendment rather than complete replacement of a law. And there are good reasons for doing this, in terms of part dependence, in terms of precedents in the criminal justice system, and so on. But why do you think India here chose the path of replacing the entire IPC, CRPC, and Evidence Act rather than moving simple amendments? Because even the changes that have been made are not that path breaking to have complete new codes, or there has been no visible policy shift where you would require a new law rather than amending the old one. And since we are already on this track, what do you think are the benefits or pitfalls of this move?
I totally agree with you, Shri, that if the attempt was or the intent was to have a totally fresh paradigm and a fresh philosophy behind the whole criminal justice system that a democratic country like ours should have, then that opportunity has been given the go by. If you look at the IPC, the 1860 IPC, which is currently in force, and you look at the Nyaya Sanhita, which is now in the form of a bill, you will find that except for one or two, additions or deletions, the major part of the change is in the increase in the amount of money that is to be paid as fine, such other matters which are essentially about the sentencing, or the which are not central to the philosophy behind which the new law is being constructed. So you are essentially tinkering with the old 1860 code and trying to give it the name of a totally new Sanhita or new code, without addressing the basic philosophy behind the kind of punishment that a democratic country like ours should be giving to its citizens for such actions that are criminal in nature, for which they need to be punished.
Right. And I was just thinking in terms of practical difficulties now, like, when there is constable who's taking down a FIR, or a prosecutor who's, preparing a charge sheet that needs to be filed, or preparing arguments in court. I mean, I think there will be a need for training them now in the new courts. There'll be huge amount of state capacity and funding which will be required to equip them with, all the changes that have been made. Start from, simple things like, numbering the sections and change in certain provisions, or what provision can be applied and what cannot be, and all of it. So do you foresee as that a challenge in the next few years when these laws are rolled out?
Undoubtedly, the retraining of the large army of policemen across the country, of the courts, of the clerks of the court, of the prosecutors, and indeed of the defense counsels and the senior counsels who are part of the judicial process of the whole criminal justice system. Their rebooting will be a huge exercise which will cause some disruption. I am sure it will take a lot of time and money. All that will have to be done. The state's capacity, which we all know is rather stretched at all times, will be further stretched, and there will be a period of a few years when this turmoil will take its toll. Especially, I would like to highlight on the code, on the criminal procedure code, which is called the BNSS,
The Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha
Nagarik
Sanhita.
Suraksha, correct. So that is where a lot of effort will have to be put in. For example, now the requirement in the bill, proposed bill, is that for every offense every crime that is reported which has a punishment of 7 years or more, a forensic team is mandatorily expected to reach the scene of crime. They are supposed to do, a full scene of crime management work of collecting evidence and all that, and also electronically filming the whole exercise. All this requires huge resources. We are talking of hundreds and thousands of cases being reported every day across the length and breadth of this country, and you would need teams that would need to reach the scene of crime immediately, so that the scene of crime is not disturbed or manipulated, and that is going to require not only money but also trained personnel across the country. Similarly, the videography of all these, search and seizure and scene of crime management processes, exercise, just doing that kind of videography is a huge logistical exercise, and how that will be managed and manned remains to be seen.
Right. Yeah, and I do hope the government has thought through this, before rolling out the laws, and has plans to ensure that adequate state capacity is built and resources are provisioned in the budget. Of course, the state governments will need support from the union for carrying out this massive expansion of state capacity and training and so on that you mentioned. So let's move on to the substantive offenses, some of the substantive offenses under the new Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, and spend a little bit of time dissecting some of them. And let's begin with the sedition offense. This has been in the news for quite some time now. The Indian Penal Code of 1860 defined sedition as bringing or attempting to bring hatred or contempt or exciting disaffection towards the government, and made this punishable with imprisonment up to 3 years or life imprisonment and fine. And of course, the words like contempt and disaffection and hatred are very much colonial in origin, and sedition has been largely misused by the government even post independence. And the Supreme Court, in fact, had stayed the operation of this offense a couple of years back. The government had agreed that they are going to rework the sedition offense. And of course, the Home Minister announced that sedition has been removed as an offense from the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Except, the commentators on Twitter were soon to point out that there is a new clause of 150 in the Nyaya Sanhita, which creates a new offense called acts endangering the sovereignty, unity, and integrity of India. And this 150 says that exciting or attempting to excite secession, armed rebellion, or subversive activities, or encouraging feelings of separatist activities, or endangering sovereignty or unity and integrity of India is going to be a punishable offense. It has increased the punishment to 7 years as opposed to 3 years under sedition, along with life imprisonment in certain cases. Now, the question is, to what extent is clause 150 justified? The words here, all the phrases here are pretty vague and broad. and abundant scope for misapplication and misuse by police or other authorities to target dissenters and so on, because words like subversive activities or endangering feelings of separatist activities are pretty vague and the bill does not define them, and these are left to the interpretation of the Thana in charge while slapping these offenses. So I want to know from you, to what extent does this replacement of sedition make sense to you or does not make sense to you? What sort of safeguards can be inbuilt now as the bill undergoes revision so that this clause 150 does not become another sedition in a different form?
Yes, I mean, you very rightly talked about the controversy regarding the word sedition and the section that exists today, and how it has been misused, and how the Honorable Supreme Court has time and again given instructions and given very clear cut opinion that sedition is definitely something that is a very rare thing. It is something that has to be proven by more than just words and other things. It is something that is very, very colonial. It's a If there is one section which symbolizes the colonial hangover, it is this. So there is a absolute need for removing this clause from the law. The new bill declares that it has removed it, but we know that section 150, the new section 150, is so worded that any activity which is perceived by the authorities as offensive, even though it is not followed up with the threat of use of violence against the state or something, the wording is so loose and so broad that we don't know how much mischief is possible within the wordings of this particular section. Unfortunately, no safeguard has been built into it. It has been left to the discretion of the local police officer to decide whether this section is to be imposed or not. And as I said, this is just the same section by another means. And not only will it have to pass the scrutiny of judicial review, I'm sure, but I also feel that it will open up possibilities for huge amount of litigation and allegations of misuse of police powers, which we had talked about a few minutes ago.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break. And in fact, as far as sedition was concerned, the court had insisted time and again that FIRs cannot be registered unless there has been an active incitement to violence, and only that constitutes sedition. Now, the standard of active incitement to violence is globally accepted in advanced jurisdictions which protect rights of individuals and free speech and so on. But this standard is again missing in the reformed bill that has been brought in by the government. But moving on, let's look at another sort of provision in this Sanhita which has created much debate. This is around the issue of false promise to marry. Now, this was not explicitly an offense under the IPC, but courts had interpreted that, consent for sexual intercourse obtained after making a false promise to marry can constitute rape, and there has been much debate on this given our socio-political context, caste, religion, and so on. But now clause 69 of this Nyaya Sanhita directly addresses this issue and imposes punishment of imprisonment and fines on obtaining consent with the false promise to marry, and makes it a separate offense. So what is your sort of take on this development, and how do you think this will play out in terms of interpretation and enforcement by the police?
You see, if the allegation is that someone has been, falsely promised marriage, and they had consensual intercourse, and subsequently, the person decides to renege from his promise of marriage, I mean, it will be very difficult to prove these things, and I don't know what kind of evidence will be brought in, except that the female, more often than not, the female will make this allegation that he had promised. Whether that promise was made in front of someone, or was it, by words and deeds which were said in private. How this will be prosecuted, it's very difficult to work that out, and to impute motive for the initial consensual sex, which and the relationship goes sour at some stage. Frankly, this again is so loosely worded and drafted that it leaves scope for any amount of mischief. I am not at all denying that such incidents may be happening, or rather are happening. And there are various kinds of inducements given for indulging in consensual sex, and subsequently those inducements turn out to be false, including money or marriage, or even change of religion in some cases. I am aware of that, but this provision needs to be, better worded, better drafted, so that on the one hand, genuine cases of cheating or of false promises are covered, and they come within the mischief of this provision, and if frivolous prosecution does not happen. I think this is a very poorly drafted section.
So there was one more clause which sort of grabbed my attention, and this is clause 224 of Nyaya Sanhita. And I'm just going to read it out to you. So it says, whoever attempts to commit suicide with the intent to compel or restrain any public servant from discharging his official duty shall be punished with simple imprisonment for a term which may exceed to 1 year, or with fine, or with both, or with the community service. So this is actually a little interesting, because there's been a tradition in India of, these public protests and fasts unto death, and no one other than Mahatma Gandhi sort of legitimized this form of disobedience, where he would sit on fast unto death to compel public servants to perform their duty or restrain themselves from doing something which he believed was illegal or unjust. So we have that tradition, but I think there have been also complaints from the police that people are resorting to this sort of like tactics in order to force them to do or not do something. So does this new clause make sense to you? Because it effectively says all fasts unto death, which we have seen so often in our public sphere, are criminalized, and any person who attempts to do such sort of satyagraha or protest or whatever you want to call it will be thrown in jail. So what is sort of your take on this?
It is quite ironic that activity, that act like satyagraha, which is, if there's one act that symbolizes the anti-colonial movement in this country and the freedom movement that our freedom fighters fought, if there's one such act, it is satyagraha, and obviously Mahatma Gandhi symbolizes it more than anyone else. Someone who kind of made it a weapon of the weak, and to now, if to now try to criminalize it. You see, if someone were to, let us take a hypothetical situation of someone saying that I am going to fast because the school fees has been increased or the mess charges have been increased in a hostel. Now, to believe that from the moment he starts fasting, he's in the process or on the road to committing suicide would be absurd. I can fast for 12 hours or 14 hours and be nowhere near a suicide. At what stage will the police feel that now he is now in the suicide zone, and at what stage will it not be in the these are very difficult provisions which are going to create a lot of controversy. They are obviously meant to curb protest of the kind that this country has seen as not only legitimate but also sacred. And I don't know whether the population or the citizenry of this country is going to accept it the way it has been drafted right now. And I'm sure a lot of jurists and legal experts are going to look at it more closely, because the right to protest is, and the right to have an opinion and the right to protest, and all that will be affected. Article 21 will come in. So this particular provision is going to face a lot of flack. That's what I feel.
Right. So apart from this, there's another clause, 195 in the Nyaya Sanhita, and I'll briefly explain what it does. And this, I think, has been inserted given the recent developments of the last decade or so, and you will know why. So it says that whoever it's called the imputations, assertions prejudicial to national integration, and it says anybody who uses words or signs or writes anything or makes any representation that has an imputation that persons, because of the reason of belonging to any religious, racial, language, or regional group or caste or community, and the imputation basically says that they do not bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of India as by law established, or uphold the sovereignty and integrity of India by virtue of their belonging to such a group. are subject to punishment. And it also has another clause which says that anybody who asserts, counsels, advises, propagates, or publishes that any class of person, because of their membership of any religious, racial, language, or regional, or caste, or community group, must be denied or deprived of their citizens' rights as citizens of India, is again a punishable offense. So the intent behind this appears that there has been a lot of claims made by certain people who seek to create conditions of disharmony in the society, who allege that certain people who, by virtue of their membership to a group, cannot bear allegiance to the Constitution of India, or they must be stripped of their citizen rights, and it sort of makes these sort of statements a punishable offense. So, what is your take on this? Is this desirable given our socio-political context? Is this a positive move? Do you think there are chances that this might stifle genuine criticism of a particular class or community? How do you think this clause 195 is going to play out?
We all know that India is a land of immense diversity, of immense, cultural differences. We have a history of different sections of people having different grievances against the state, whether it is in the northeast or those who are indulging in left-wing extremism, or those who are have very very different political orientations. Now, to criminalize everything which does not conform to the mainstream ipso facto is something that is going to face a lot of judicial challenge, not only in terms of freedom of expression, but also in terms of the maintaining the cultural and other diversities that are guaranteed in the constitution. So there will be different people, different sets of people who will make their demands in different ways, in different areas of and geographies within the boundaries of the country, and to read criminality into differences of opinion is something that democratic country, and especially one with a hoary past like ours, would look at with a lot of suspicion. And I'm sure this is one more area where a lot of debate is still, still to be held, and a lot of debate is going to happen before we see the last of this.
Right. And finally, before we close, I want to spend a few minutes talking about a new form of punishment that has been introduced by this bill. Earlier, under IPC, there could be imprisonment, simple or rigorous. There could be fines as a form of punishment. There could be forfeiture of property. Now, the Nyaya Sanhita introduces a new class of punishment called community service. Many of us who watch, Hollywood shows or movies would be familiar with this term, community service, as a punishment imposed by the court. So, the Nyaya Sanhita says community service as a punishment can be imposed by the court for petty offences like drunken misconduct, public servant engaging in a trade which is not supposed to, or a first time theft of rupees 5,000 or less. So I want to know from you, what do you make of this innovation of community service being introduced in India for the first time? And given your experience in law enforcement, do you think this shift towards non-incarceration penalties such as community servant is desirable?
I think it's a very welcome thing. Definitely a very welcome thing, especially for first-time offenders and for offenders who've broken some petty law, whether it is of jumping the red light or or petty theft. It is something that is going to have a salutary effect on the rest of the population, who will see those who are punished for this actually doing public service or community service in full of the public eye. It will also decongest the jails, which is a very good thing in itself. I would definitely say that in a large number of cases of petty nature where punishment is to be given out, community service should be encouraged as a form of punishment.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Ahmed, for joining me on this conversation today and going over the different aspects of Nyaya Sanhita. We, of course, know that the Parliamentary Committee has only 3 months to bring out reports on these three laws, and we hope that a lot of corrections and revisions will be made. Of course, there are a lot of errors in Nyaya Sanhita and other laws which people have been quick to point out. I'm sure these are typographical issues which will be corrected, but we also expect certain substantial revisions on the provisions of this bill, which hopefully will be in the direction of strengthening individual liberties and curbing the power of the state and police. Thank you for this chat once again, and hope to have you back on Police Chowki soon.
Thank you, Shri. Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.